This is so huge.
Draft2Digital is going to acquire Smashwords as of March 1st, 2022.
This is a major, major shift in the landscape for not just self-publishing, but publishing at large. I really think Dale from Self-Publishing with Dale put it best when he said this.
The last real big shift I ever saw was with the Create Space merger with KDP.
If you want a detailed breakdown of what this means from a day-to-day perspective as somebody who might be using Draft2Digital or Smashwords, then make sure you check out the replay of Dale's live stream over here. He does a great job going through all of that. What I'm going to do instead is try and answer my two biggest questions about this whole transaction. Number one is whether this is even going to work. At least 1 out of every 2 transactions like this is a big failure. Secondly, and more importantly, is if this does work, does this mean that the new Draft2Digital can finally break Amazon's stranglehold on the self-publishing side of things?
Kindly make D2D so strong that it can replace Amazon KDP. To that we say, challenge accepted.
I like that attitude, but let's see if they're actually capable of even stepping into the ring. Hey, it's Deborah, and welcome to another video on the business side of self-publishing. Like many of you, when I woke up and saw this tweet, I was a bit like, where did this even come from?
I think I sent Mark an email at the end of November, and Mark wrote me back in like 10 minutes with like 5 words. And I was just like, oh, wow, we might actually be moving forward on this.
The 2 CEOs of D2D and Smashwords were on this live stream answering questions as they came for over an hour. I have spent the last 2 days poring over every second of this interview and pulled out the best bits for you. I have edited those for clarity because there was simply a lot that was said, and it was said at multiple points during the interview, but I've done my best to preserve the context of their answers. If you are interested, I do encourage you to go and watch the whole interview because it is just full of fascinating information. With that out of the way, let's get into dissecting their answers. I'm going to spend a lot of time in this video digging into the details of the financials and the operations and the strategic business sense behind all of this, but ultimately, the one thing that is really going to make the difference in whether or not this transaction succeeds is going to be the people involved.
You know, we run into each other at conferences all the time. We've sat on panels together. We have always liked everyone that we meet. At Draft2Digital, you guys are good people. We've always respected you. And as competitors, you know, it made us think, well, shoot, you know, that guy is good. I wish he was on our team. So there's always been a respect there.
That's a good starting point. The next question is, how much of the core talent at Smashwords is going to come across with the transaction?
Mark, will you stay around? How long?
I'm sticking around. I want this to be the best thing that ever happened to the broader indie community and to the culture of books.
I needed Mark as part of the new team. He's going to be heavily involved in helping plan strategy direction and advise me. I don't want Mark going anywhere, and I know he doesn't want to go anywhere. We know the knowledge and expertise of both teams is extensive, and getting it all together under one roof is going to be very powerful.
This is a really positive sign.
We're hiring, and I think it's very important that we point that out. We're not doing this to downsize or consolidate or shrink down. Our whole goal is to grow. We have grand plans.
This is all sounding really, really good so far. So let's get to the most obvious question.
Why merge? Or what's the goal of this?
You know, authors have a choice. Work with Smashwords, work with Draft2Digital, or work with someone else. And often it's a confusing choice.
When we consider our supply chain as publishers, we really need to look at 3 parts: the printer, the distributor, and the retailer. Now, if you are doing print books, the 2 main players in the space are IngramSpark and KDP, although D2D is starting to get into the space with its print beta. In terms of print distribution, IngramSpark is really the only player in this space ever since Baker and Taylor exited the wholesale distribution business. But in terms of ebook distribution, there is actually a lot more choice. IngramSpark will do wide ebook distribution. KDP obviously does its own distribution, while D2D and Smashwords have both been ebook distributors historically. There are 2 things to note here though. Audiobook distribution is working through an entirely different set of players in the market, and BookFunnel is targeting a different kind of distribution. BookFunnel is kind of weird because it does sit in the space of ebook and audiobook distribution, but it's actually better aligned with other e-commerce technologies such as WooCommerce or something like that, because primarily the way it's set up to work is to enable authors to directly sell to a customer via their own website or in-person events and things like that.
We can do more for indie authors working together than working as competitors.
Exactly what Mark said. And we know that we can make better and more tools for authors working together versus trying to create the same systems in two places.
So the stated reason here is synergies between the two businesses. And that's a very common justification, but I want to point out just how unusual it is for these two companies specifically to be doing this. Most of the time, M&A transactions are initiated by a much larger company who is more mature and at a decline stage of their business lifecycle, buying up a smaller, newer player in the market, either for their talent, which is called an acqui-hire sometimes, or in order to gain access to their technology or their market presence in an area that the larger, more established company does not have any presence in at all. What is not common is two players in a growth space deciding to band together and fight the Goliaths in that particular industry.
Well, Chris, your third sentence in that email got me immediately. It was something like, I continue to think about how we can work together to better the lives of indie authors. I've fielded dozens of inquiries from potential acquirers. No one ever spoke to me like that.
It would be really weird if neither of these companies had received offers from any other company in this space. I am sure they would have been approached by Amazon or IngramSpark or any of the other big players in this market. And the other shocking but also not shocking thing about this is all of those other offers did not hit the mark for either of these two CEOs until this particular proposal. And that is why this transaction is such a huge deal for us self-published authors. If you look at the board of directors and the senior management teams at both of these companies, there are actually authors in the boardroom having input, and not just input, but significant influence in terms of the strategic direction and the priorities of these companies. That does not happen with any of the other major players in the industry.
One thing that I've really come to appreciate is that both of our companies have very similar attitudes about difficult problems that authors face. Because there are a lot of people out there who will just say, oh, that's too difficult, we can't do that. But both of us tend to look at difficult problems and tackle those difficult problems because they are difficult and because we know we can tackle them. We know we can make an improvement there and make it easier, more accessible to the folks that we're serving.
We are competing with a bigger and wider industry than just the self-publishing platform. We want to make sure we treat authors with the dignity and respect that they deserve. They should have full control over their works. And that's a very big part of our two companies. Both Smashwords and Draft Digital always allows you to choose which retailers you want us to distribute to.
Yeah, our perspective is that authors deserve to be at the center of the publishing universe. That's the world that I want to realize. Authors should have the freedom to decide where they publish, how they price, how they promote. They shouldn't have some company telling them where they can and cannot distribute.
I've gone on and on before about just how dangerous it is for us to become so reliant on Amazon for our livelihoods as self-published authors. So it's great to see that these two companies are aligned on their vision. This is a really positive sign. And the other subtle thing that you'll notice if you watch the entire live Q&A in full is that often everybody discussing it refers to it as a merger instead of an acquisition. The press release and all of the written materials talk about this being an acquisition, which it technically is if you look at how the transaction is structured. In an acquisition, you have one company taking over another by essentially buying all of their shares. That's what's happening here. The fact that they refer to this transaction as a merger, despite the legal and accounting technicalities of how this transaction is classified, I find is very illuminating of their mindset going into this. My interpretation of that is both Draft Digital and Smashwords are coming into this transaction as equals, which again is pretty rare.
Chris, came right out and said what their sales were. Private companies don't do that.
They really don't. It is not done. If either of these companies were Australian or New Zealand or even UK companies, there would be statutory reporting requirements and they would have to file their financial statements with the local companies authority, and I would be able to pull those financial reports and analyze them for you. But they're based in the US, and in the US, the only way you can ever actually see inside another private company's financial information is if an insider actually tells you.
That you don't share that information with your top competitor. But Chris did it as a sign to show his good faith in these discussions.
Yeah.
And that number told me something else. Drafted Digital was doing a lot better than I thought you were. You basically have twice our sales with fewer titles.
The most recent data we have is from this Forbes interview 10 years ago, which put Smashwords' annual revenue at $12 million when they only had 127,000 titles across 44,000 authors. If we take the combined numbers that have been disclosed as part of the press release for this acquisition, then there are a combined 880,000 ebooks and 11,000 print books, which for simplicity, I'm going to assume is also included in the ebook numbers. That's 7 times the growth in titles across 10 years, which is a compound annual growth rate of like 20%, which also tracks with this figure of 20% growth on December year-on-year sales of the Smashwords store. Massive, massive growth. Keep in mind, these extrapolations are about as accurate as trying to hit a particular grain of sand from the car park near the beach, but bear with me for a moment, right? If we apply that compound annual growth rate of about 20% to that ballpark figure of $12 million given by Forbes 10 years ago, we would have something like estimated annual revenues of $84 million for Smashwords. If we take that extrapolation and combine it with Mark's comment there, we could guess that D2D has annual revenues of maybe in the ballpark of 160 to 170 million. That's pretty good, especially when you consider the revenue model that both these companies have.
We are the most indie-friendly publishing platforms in the industry. When everyone else in the industry is trying to exploit authors and charge them for overpriced services of nebulous value, services that often empty the author's wallet and put the author out of business before they even get started. We are completely different. We are here to empower authors, to help authors be successful. Our two companies are unique in that way. We also chose the most difficult business model in the industry, and that's basing our success on the success of our authors.
Specifically, they work on commission, and their commission rates are one of the lowest around. In addition to that, they also don't charge any upfront fees or any download fees or any other ancillary fees.
Our goal is to create tools so that authors can spend more time doing what they love. If you can write more titles and spend more time with your readers, then you can succeed more, which helps us succeed. And that's why we built a business model around author success.
Both of our companies have grown and been profitable and are profitable and debt-free.
This is the most important bit of financial disclosure that's been made anywhere regarding this transaction. Neither company has had to have its founders relinquish any sort of control over the operations and strategic direction of the companies in order to secure financing from lenders or from investors. And that is a really, really good thing. It means that so long as the entire senior management team is competent and is aligned on the values, is aligned on the operating philosophy, is aligned on the mission of what they're trying to achieve with this combined company, there is a very good chance that this merger is going to be successful.
And I'm confident that when we join our systems together, the Smashwords community is going to see big improvements. And a lot of this is based on technology and approaches and processes. And we've got stuff that you guys don't have that can help your authors. We've been in business 14 years, D2D 10. Both of our companies have invested millions of dollars to create super sophisticated distribution systems. I think each of our systems are easily scalable to probably more books that even exist on the planet today. We have way, way too much capacity for these massive distribution systems that are very expensive to maintain. And so by combining our distribution systems together, that's going to free up a lot of money that we can then plow into other R&D investments to create new next generation tools.
14 years in software development terms is ancient. There isn't a lot of information about exactly what tech stack each of the companies is using. They are probably going to be built using different technologies, which means that this is going to be a long and painful process of trying to merge all the systems together and integrate them. I would expect a project of this scale is probably going to take a number of years, but in theory, once it's all done, they should actually be able to realize some of those cost savings. The CTOs at both companies are still around, have been around since the founding days, were probably the people who set up all of this infrastructure in place. So when you look at the management team and at the capabilities of the people who are there and the fact that everybody from the founding team is still there, There's a good chance they can avert a lot of the common post-merger mistakes that most companies will fall into. That said, we don't have a lot of details about what the post-merger, post-acquisition implementation plan looks like.
We could go on forever on ideas because I don't know what we'll implement first. I have a whole team of people that just keep throwing me ideas. I have sheets of paper over here from people because everyone's excited about having the Smashwords store.
I have a million ideas as well. I'm really excited by this.
You know, these implementation questions, these are when we get down into the nitty-gritty details of development and software. And we don't know the answer to this question yet, but we can tell you the goal. And the goal is to get D2D authors access to the Smashwords coupon system. It's actually hard to answer the question because there's so many possible paths. And our first goal is to free up development resources so we can focus a lot on that. These are the sort of things that kind of excite me. This is like a process problem, a systems issue. And our goal will be the path of least resistance, lowest friction. So we will find an intuitive way to make that work.
To date, I have not used either D2D or Smashwords because the one book that I do have out there at the moment is a kid's picture book, which doesn't do so well in terms of ebook format and also has a custom trim size in terms of print. But both of these companies have things that neither Amazon nor IngramSpark offer that I really want to try out when I publish my prose novel later this year.
Authors are going to gain access to Smashwords pre-sales, so you can run private and public exclusive pre-sales in the Smashwords store and use those pre-sales to capture your readers, your customers' email addresses, and it's all permission-based.
Honestly, this is the most exciting part for me because no other platform really offers this.
Another really exciting thing about this boils down to data. You know, we've got the two largest indie distributors joining together. We have access to data that no one else has access to. So we've got this unique perspective on how titles are performing. With more data, the data becomes higher quality. And we can use this data to help each of our retailers and library platforms identify the most reader-pleasing books down to minute categories and subcategories.
Amazon is so stingy with data. They won't tell you how many people follow you. They won't tell you who bought your books. They have no way of letting you contact any of your reviewers. It's just a nightmare trying to get information out of them. And IngramSpark is a wholesale distributor. When you look at their reports, you have no idea who is even ordering your books. You don't know how many of those orders are coming through from Amazon or Book Depository or some other random retailer out there that people are buying your books from. And so you have no way of trying to track down the people who like your books.
A big thing that we think is going to be huge is print on demand. Print is complicated. It's a whole complicated beast. The Smashwords authors are going to get access to the print system, as we call it, D2D print. We have a whole tool set now that can convert your ebook straight into full print ready layout. We can make a cover based on your ebook cover. This is all automated. And so we're in the scale up phase.
I got to say, I'm really excited about the print option. You know, I think this is going to be just as disruptive to print on demand as Smashwords was disruptive to ebook publishing 14 years ago.
Anyone who has ever tried setting up a title on IngramSpark for print distribution, you all know the nightmare that I am talking about. That is the most dreaded part of my publication process. I kid you not. And I say this as someone who always reads everything in the knowledge base and the FAQs and the manual and the user guide and everything. It is a nightmare working through it, and trying to figure out what their requirements are is just
And I think we have a much better interface than the KDP print by quite a bit.
In all honesty, I don't find the KDP print interface that bad, so I am going to be very curious to be trying out the D2D interface for the print beta.
You'll make the most money at Amazon sales using KDP print, but you don't have to use their expanded distribution. Our expanded distribution, you'll actually make a bit more money and actually get a bit wider reach. We basically send it into the wholesale distribution system.
Okay, we need to pull this apart because, as I understand from Dale,
the former director of IngramSpark, Robin Kotler, and I spoke with her, and from what she stated, the parent company of IngramSpark is Ingram Content Group, who also owns Lightning Source, who fulfills print runs for, ready for it, KDP's expanded distribution. So the distribution for expanded distribution is exactly the same as IngramSpark's distribution.
And if you look through the D&D docs on their print beta, they actually state they're using IngramSpark's distribution. Theoretically, these two things should be the same, but for some reason they're not. And I don't know whether this is because KDP is only using the US and UK part of the Ingram distribution network or not, but Either way, this would seem to indicate that if you don't want to put up with Ingram's terrible interface and poor customer service, you can just go through D2D and go direct to KDP, except for one very important thing: if you want to do hard covers. Hopefully D2D will get there in a few years with the print beta, but for now, we are still stuck with doing KDP, IngramSpark, and D2D if you plan to offer your title in all of these formats.
We can go on forever with a list of features of combining the two companies, but our goals as a theme should just be remembered. We're going to take the best parts of both companies and put that into one great system.
To really understand what this means, I think you really have to look back at how both of these companies were founded. D2D is a tech company at its core. One of its founders is an author who asked his two CS engineering friends to write a program that would enable him to take his Google Doc manuscript to convert it into a publishable ebook.
Drafted Digital prides itself on its user interface and user experience design.
The key value of that company is in its formatting technology. On the other hand, Smashwords is really a retailer and distribution company combined. It started because Mark and his wife wrote a book and couldn't convince anybody in traditional publishing to take a chance on it. So they decided to self-publish by setting up a storefront and striking distribution deals with various other retailers.
I created this company to empower indie authors to become their own publishers, to bypass gatekeepers, to empower readers to read what they want rather than having publishers decide what readers could read.
Because the publishing process is so interlinked between all of these different stages in the supply chain, over time, both of these companies began making inroads into each other's territories. So Smashwords developed its own formatter and D2D signed its own distribution agreements. But at the end of the day, these are two companies with two different sets of core competencies that complement each other. And that bodes really, really well for this merger because integrations like this are how you actually go about achieving synergies.
It's a win-win.
I have had so many thoughts trying to process this, and I'm not even sure I've processed all of them, but I'd like to hear from you. What are your thoughts on this merger? Let me know in the comments. I'm going to read every single one and reply. If I take a step back and consider this from an overall perspective, there are a lot of things going for this merger. All of the founders are still there. They are not beholden to or under pressure from any outside investors or lenders in terms of what they do with the company to deliver any ROIs, have any arbitrary KPIs to hit other than those that they set for themselves. There are actual authors involved in the decision making at every level of the company, including the most senior levels. And just listening to these two CEOs on this call, you can tell that there is really good alignment between them on their mission, their core values, their operating philosophy, their strategic priorities, the way they work together. This has been one of the most amiable Q&A sessions that I've seen of this type, except for this one little moment of tension.
Our system does support the ability to, we call it deleting a title. That'll hide them. And to recover them, though, requires a customer support.
Well, that might be a capability that we have in our dashboard that you might want to adopt. We don't have a delete button, but we have an archive button.
And we have a ticket.
And then bring it back to life.
Yeah. Yeah, we actually have a ticket for that, Mark. So I think it'll be, we like the idea of that. It's just one of those things we never got around to, right? There's always a priorities. So
okay.
Can the new draft to digital supplant Amazon KDP? Well, that's really hard to answer. Amazon is just super dominant right now, and they've got a pretty genius plan to make sure that this market dominance continues into the foreseeable future. There's this really weird thing where the world is moving to an increased level of globalization, but also increased localization. So on one extreme, you've got entities like Amazon who are just getting bigger and bigger until they're basically quasi-utilities. And if you are running a business, you don't really have a choice of not using Amazon. On this end of the spectrum, you can only really compete if you have those massive economies of scale. You've also got the proliferation of tons and tons of smaller players simply because the barriers to entry have been lowered so much by companies like Amazon, who are lowering the barriers to entry with these quasi-utility services, that these smaller players are able to carve out viable businesses simply on the strength of their curation and customer service. The amount of capital you need to invest in a lot of businesses has never been lower. And in this landscape, the role of distributors like D2D is just going to become increasingly important. Every single business who is producing content, products, and offering services need to find some way of connecting to all of these individual smaller retail outlets who have really strong relationships with the end customer, and there is no way you can do that on your own other than with the help of a distributor like D2D. And D2D and Smashwords are still behind in terms of their distribution reach when you compare them to IngramSpark. Not only are they relying on Ingram for print distribution, but even if you compare their core strength, which is ebook distribution, to what Ingram offers in terms of ebook distribution, they don't have as many partners signed up. That's not even considering the distribution of audiobooks, which is currently dominated by ACX. D2D does have a partnership with Findaway Voices, which is now owned by Spotify, but that is just the tip of the iceberg. And we haven't even gone into this weird space of private distribution that BookFunnel sits in.
Over the next few years, we're going to look back on this as something that's pretty monumental.
I do have high hopes though, and I am really, really rooting for this merger between D2D and Smashwords to succeed, because I really think we do need somebody out there who is actually on the side of us authors. Amazon is always going to be focused on lowering prices for its customers by using its dominant market position to devalue content with its subscription models. And Ingram, it's really a logistics company. They've got a diversified business across marine transportation, book distribution, book manufacturing. They're a printer and distributor. If you look at Ingram Content's leadership team, while they do have experience in publishing, they've all come up through the business side of publishing, from IT or operations. None of them, to my knowledge, are actually authors, and I don't really think they understand the challenges that we face as indie and self-published authors. You only have to look as far as the IngramSpark official Facebook group for authors to see a whole bunch of people who are very disgruntled by the poor user experience and the very curious decisions that they've made around customer service. I'm going to be watching this very closely, and I will try out Draft Digital when I publish my prose novel later this year. I'm going to be curious to see if and when they might publish a more detailed roadmap in terms of the implementation and the transition plan. Certainly, they have a history of being way more transparent than Amazon or IngramSpark ever is, so I've got my fingers crossed. And if you have any specific questions or concerns or suggestions for the D2D and Smashwords team, then I think you can actually contact them directly on their website. I'm going to leave a link in the description below. I have high hopes. I think this is a really good thing for self-publishing and the publishing landscape in general. And if anybody is going to have a chance at breaking Amazon's market dominance, then it's going to be these guys, a company that is run by authors for authors with over a decade of experience in competing against Amazon directly. If you're not across what Amazon is up to, then you really need to check out this video next.